Hello, everybody, and welcome to day two. I suppose it's the first day of actual content, but day two of our cash flow inflow series. So in this series, what we're trying to look at is how cash flow can help you facilitate difficult conversations with clients and how you can potentially utilize cash flow to meet your consumer duty obligations by looking at it in different contexts with your clients. During this series, I'm going to be using Truth to showcase some of these points, but I'm trying to be as cash flow and system and tool agnostic as possible. So everything that we cover during this series can equally be achieved using other cash flow tools. I'm just going to show you some of the ways in which we do that with Truth, but I try not to focus on the actual kind of doing of stuff, more about the conversations that it can facilitate. So how we can talk about different things with our clients. In today's session, we're going to be talking about protection. And I do loads of events. I talk at loads of events all around the country with hundreds of advisors. And one of the things that I found is that a lot of advisors don't even discuss protection with clients at all. I'm not sure what the reason is. Maybe it's just not as sexy as investments or pensions. But cash flow modeling really is part of a comprehensive financial planning strategy or service. And if you're not doing protection, then are you really doing comprehensive financial planning? A lot of the things that we're going to talk about during the session aren't necessarily profitable. They're not going to enhance your business. They're not going to make your business more profitable, but they will enhance your relationship with clients, which will lead to more profitability down the line. And again, one of the questions that we get a lot, and one of the things that I referenced in the introductory session, was that there's this kind of misconception that certain clients don't need cash flow modeling. My client's fine, my client's got loads of money. Why is cash flow relevant for clients in that situation? Later in the week, we're going to be looking at spending more, but a lot of what we talk about during these sessions is using cash flow as a stress test. So using cash flow to facilitate conversations and help clients visualize things that they might not have thought about otherwise, like capacity for loss, like catastrophe planning, like later life, like spending more, spending less, all of these difficult things. And ultimately, if a client passed away or a partner of a client passed away, would you rather have to cross the road to avoid an awkward money conversation with the widow or widower, or would you rather feel good about the fact that you got them the right life cover when the opportunity was there? And if you do protection, if you're already doing protection, are you using it when you're presenting to clients? Are you using cash flow money to talk about protection with your clients? Could you potentially get better use out of the tools that you're already using and that you're already paying for? So this series as a whole is all about the kind of conversations we can have with clients, how to encourage clients to engage better with the planning process using cash flow modeling. And let's skip straight to some screen sharing. So I'm just going to share my screen with you. Here we go. Lovely. So I have a case open. This is Michael and Jane. What I'm going to do, again, trying to focus on how we do these things with Truth. We're looking really at kind of the high level concepts of what we do with cash flow modeling. So I'm going to start just by kind of showing you a brief introduction to this client. So this is Michael and Jane. They're a relatively simple couple. They are a couple in their 50s. They've got some savings. They've got pensions. They've got a family home. They've got a mortgage. It's a few years away from redemption. And they've got a business that they run as a couple. So equal shares of this £500,000 business. They've got some income. So they're about 10 years away from retirement at this point. They're both drawing salaries from the business. And this chart down the bottom shows their income for the rest of their lives. So we've got some salaries there through to about age 65. And then we've got part tax-free, part taxable income from the pensions. Tax-free cash is exhausted by about age 83. And then thereafter, it's all taxable income. And then we've got state pensions as well at the bottom there. So all being well and good, this is what the rest of their lives might look like. And then we've got expenditure. And expenditure is really kind of one of the key elements to cash flow planning. And you can look at expenditure in as much or as little detail as you want. But for this client, I've just broken it down into some very kind of broad strokes headings, so essentials and discretionary stuff. We've also got things like education expenses. So they've got 2 kids in paid education right at the end of school fees at the moment. So 18 months for one and maybe 6 months left for the other. They've got a mortgage. Mortgage has still got some way to go on it. They've got things like car purchases later down the road. They've got a rental property, a buy-to-let that they're buying in about 5 years' time, or planning on buying a holiday home that they're planning on buying in about 5 years' time. And how does their cash flow look as a result of that? So this is our cash flow capital chart in truth. And what it does is it shows the client's liquidity position now and in the future. If it's all blue, then everything's fine. If it drops down into red at any point, then the client potentially has some kind of liquidity problem at some point moving forwards. And this client, we can see they don't have a liquidity problem. And this is one of the kind of the obvious areas where people say to us, okay, well, my client doesn't need cash flow modeling. And theoretically, that may well be the case for a client like this. But actually, what we find is that this actually opens a load of avenues for conversations with clients. You can stress test all of these things. And when we stress test things, and when we look at capacity for loss, when we look at death or disability, we're not going out to try and scare clients. What we actually want to do is try and reassure clients and say to them, look, okay, this could happen. It's a worst case scenario, this could happen. But if this worst case happens, do we have tools in our armory to deal with them? In truth, there's a really easy way of looking at catastrophes. So you literally just change this selector up at the top. Currently looking at no catastrophe. We can look at death, premature disablement of either client or partner. They're equal parties in the business, equal partners in the business. So whether we look at what happens for Jane and the kids if Michael died, or what happens for Michael and the kids if Jane dies, the cash flows are pretty much identical in this situation. But what does this mean? So this is the client's liquidity position if either of them died. And we can see that actually they'd run out of liquid capital at about age 74. So red, as I say, is bad. But again, what does this mean? And it all comes down to all of the assumptions that we've made so far. So when we talk about how to talk about disability with clients, and why cash flow is so powerful, what it actually does is it facilitates those conversations with clients about what happens to all of those assumptions that we've already discussed. So is it sufficient to say, okay, you are as a couple spending £130,000 a year, 40k tax at £95,000 a year. If one of you died or was disabled, that would drop by 30%, 50%. Or is it actually, kind of easier to break down these figures when we start to drill down into what's actually going to happen? So when you're looking at expenditure as 25k's worth of essentials and 37k's worth of discretionary stuff, it's actually really hard to talk to clients about how those might be affected by death or by disability. So, if one of you were disabled, how would your discretionary spending be affected? Very hard to say. Whereas if you say, okay, you're currently spending £8,000 a year on holidays as a couple, how would your holidays be affected if one of you died or was disabled? You've got Jane and the kids. What would Jane and the kids be spending on holidays? Would they go on similar holidays? Would they go on better holidays? Would that £8,000 drop down to 6.5 for your big annual family holiday if one of you had died? But equally, if you were disabled, would you still want to go on similar holidays, but maybe spend even more? Would it go up to £10,000 or £12,000 because you need to upgrade accommodation or upgrade flights or whatever it might be? Starting out from assets, I suppose, is probably the obvious place to start. There are potential questions on everything here. When we look at the pension funds, do we already have death benefits? Do we already have disability benefits built into our pension funds? And actually, when we look at the income, when we look at the catastrophe, if either Michael or Jane died, what I've got set up in this client's case is that, there we go, so we've got some tax-free dependence drawdown that's coming in to the survivor in the case of either having died. We can see that coming in there already. Do we have their existing life cover built in? Have we thought about the death or disability benefits from their DC pensions, their DB pensions? Equally, back to assets, we've got the family home. Are they intending to still live in the family home? Can they afford to still live in the family home if one dies or is disabled? Mortgage, do we have the mortgage? Is the mortgage going to be redeemed in the event of a catastrophe? Do we have the existing life cover in place to pay that off? How about the business? This is a really key one. So would the business continue? Would the income from the business continue? If they are directors of the company, does it rely on them both being around and fit and well? Would the business be wound up and sold? Would it still have a sale value? Would the income continue? Would, if the company stays and operates in much the same way, would the income for the survivor increase or decrease or change? And again, cars, is this a private car? Is it a company car? Is it run through the business? Would it change in the event of death or disability? Again, we've already covered would income be affected? But the really key point here is how Cashflow facilitates conversations with clients about expenditure in the event of disability. So, we've got the essentials, we've got the discretionary stuff, school fees. Would school fees continue? Would the mortgage continue? Would a car be bought later on? The changes that we've assumed about expenditure in the future, like spending more on discretionary stuff in retirement, or spending less on discretionary stuff in later life, or spending more on servicing costs in later life, would those things change at different points or earlier? If they're both directors of the company, they share responsibility of the children, would there be additional costs incurred as a result of the catastrophe? So if Michael died or if Jane died, would they need to pay for additional help in the home or additional childcare? Would they need to, again, especially in terms of disability, would we have additional costs for care in the home for the person who has potentially been disabled? So all of these conversations are really, really difficult to have if you don't have access to cash flow modeling, which kind of facilitates all of those things and helps clients really look at those aspects of their financial plans. So this is Jane's cash flow. So this is Michael's cash flow, sorry, if Jane had died yesterday. And again, one of the key elements to talking with clients about catastrophes, in truth especially, is how you engage them with these awkward conversations. And one of the things that we find really helps is talking about if it had just happened rather than if it were about to happen, because it's a much more palatable conversation to have with the client. What would have happened had you died yesterday, rather than what happens if you die tomorrow? So just one thing to bear in mind if you're talking to clients about these things. But I suppose the obvious question here is, okay, they're 10 years away from retirement and they're currently earning £75,000 a year each. If we're losing effectively 10 years worth of income, do we need £75,000 a year for 10 years as an FIV policy, or do we need a lump sum of £750,000? And if you're looking at that as a kind of a rule of thumb, I suppose you might say, okay, to replace £75,000 a year's worth of income for 10 years, 750k will do the trick. But actually, is that necessarily going to be the case when we factor in all of the changes to their income, their expenditure, their assets? Once we start engaging the client with those conversations, it does allow us to then look at a much more sensible figure for them based on their actual requirements, their actual needs, having gone through and engaged them with that process of talking about what's going to change in the event of a catastrophe, in the event of death, in the event of disability. Again, this can be achieved differently depending on which piece of software you use, but in truth, we just have a tool on the cash flow called More Protection, and we can set a threshold for their cash flow. So do we want it just to not run out of money? In this case, I'm going to prevent them ever dropping below 100k. And we'll say that if Jane died, Michael would need a lump sum of X to avoid his cash flow ever dropping below £100,000. And hopefully it's going to be significantly lower than 750k. So we get a figure, there we go, £170,000. So if Michael or if Jane, or this could be a joint first death term assurance policy with a 10-year term on it, we could be looking at a figure of £170,000. So we can show that on their cash flow, and we can say to them, look, £170,000 potentially enough to ensure that the kids stay in private education. You can still pay the wedding gift in a few years' time. You can still go on those £8,000 worth of holidays every year in retirement, and kind of all of the things that you said you want to do. And rather than running out of money at age 74, you can see you now have a pound out, £100,000 left at the lowest point of your cash flow. And again, we can change these figures. We can say, okay, well, kind of what if we needed to have £200,000 left? So what if you had £200,000 of life cover? How does that then make your cash flow look? But again, really, it's about having those conversations with clients. It's not about trying to scare clients and say, you know, kind of this is potentially what your cash flow might look like. It's about trying to reassure clients that, you know, we have already thought of these things for you. We've already looked at, you know, what happens in the event of adverse market conditions, what happens if one of you dies or is disabled. And actually, we've gone out and got some quotes and have built in an alternative scenario where we have some life cover in place for you. You know, this is my recommendation. And from a consumer duty perspective, in terms of the client visualizing things, what we have here is we have two scenarios overlaid, one on top of another. And the bottom one here, this black line, is my current position. And the orange one here is my recommended scenario. And they're both what happens if Jane had died. But one is Jane dies following my recommendations, and the other is Jane dies ignoring my recommendation. So from a consumer duty perspective, in terms of helping clients visualize the impact of a financial decision, there's nothing much clearer than a good cash flow model. So we can say to clients, look, you know, here's the information. Here's a chart that very clearly shows you the potential impact of the £80 a month worth of life cover that I'm recommending you take out. Can you afford the £80 a month? Well, here's another cash flow chart that shows how affordable that premium is. But here is the life cover in as clear and as transparent a way as is possible. This is some information that you can take away that you can use to make an informed decision. And that really is, just about kind of tied up for the day. Really what we want to talk about when we talk about kind of how you engage clients with conversations about difficult aspects of their lives, about their financial futures using cash flow modeling, it's really about looking at, and the whole of this series is about looking at the areas where you don't currently leverage cash flow modeling to the best of its potential. So when we talk about cash flow modeling, we almost invariably find that people say, okay, I use it for my clients who are in or at retirement, or I use it for my clients who are going into drawdown. If you do protection, maybe you could be using it to talk to clients about protection. If you don't do protection, maybe you should be. It's all about, as I say, how you engage clients with those conversations. If the client says, I don't need cash flow modeling, or my situation is very simple, have we looked at some of these stress tests that can potentially make a very nice, happy cash flow, one like we saw for Michael and Jane at the start, actually look a lot more negative, a lot more kind of ropey. And again, it's not about scaring clients. It's about reassuring them that, we've already encountered these things. We've already thought about them. And, we can find a solution together. And again, about engaging clients with all those conversations about how things are actually going to change, and really kind of bringing them in and involving them with the planning process, rather than just making very kind of broad strokes assumptions about your assets, your income, your expenditure. We can say to them, we can sit down with them and say, okay, if one of you died or was disabled, we don't necessarily need £500,000, £750,000 of the life cover, because you might not buy that holiday home in a couple of years' time. And if you don't buy that holiday home, we need to factor that into your future plan so we can get you an accurate projection moving forwards. Or would you still put the kids through private school? Or would you still give your daughter that wedding gift in a couple of years' time? All of these things are really key, because if you don't need to buy £150,000 worth of holiday home, you might not need £200,000 of life cover. And that's just about it for today. So in tomorrow's session, we're going to be talking about retirement. So talking about how to talk to clients about retirement. And we're looking specifically at the shape of retirement. So what retirement actually looks like, rather than just drawdown versus annuity, or the typical ways of using cash flow modeling. So thanks everyone for joining us for this second session, and look forward to seeing you all again tomorrow.